The silence of the void was not empty, it was heavy, pregnant with the weight of 1,000 years of unspent rage, pressing against the hull of the sleek, pitch-black needleship named the Revenant as it drifted out of the warp ribbon and into real space. Kaelen did not breathe the air of the ship. He inhaled the anticipation of the end. Below him, rotating with the majestic, uncaring slowness of a god, lay the Ouroboros ring, a megastructure encircling a dying white dwarf star, a halo of steel and light that housed the trillion souls of the Aethelgard Empire. To them, 5 centuries had passed since Kaelen had been erased from history. To Kaelen, trapped in the null state dimension where time was a frozen geography rather than a flowing river, it had been an eternity of seconds, a singular moment of betrayal stretched into an infinite horizon of agonizing clarity. He adjusted the gauntlets on his forearms, the chronos siphons hummed with a sound that wasn't sound, but a vibration in the bone. They were not weapons of mass destruction, they were instruments of correction. He didn't want to destroy the rain. He wanted to excise the rot at its heart. He initiated the descent, the Revenant slipping through the automated defense grid like a ghost, his ship's signature masked by the very phase shift technology Vexia had stolen from him to build this empire. The irony was the first course of the meal he intended to serve. As the ship pierced the atmospheric shield of the ring's upper habitat layer, the sky turned a bruised purple. Kaelen stood from the pilot's cradle, the neural link severing with a wet snap. He walked to the airlock, the metal floor cold against his boots, every step a thunderclap in his own mind. He remembered the last time he stood at an airlock. He remembered Vexia's eyes, not filled with malice, but with a terrifying, pragmatic sorrow as she jettisoned him into the null state. For the greater good, she had whispered. The airlock cycled open, not into a vacuum, but onto the pristine, marble-tiled landing platform of Sector 7, the district of the High Archons. The air smelled of ozone and synthetic jasmine. It was sickeningly sweet. Alarms began to blare, a polite, rhythmic pulsing that shattered the peace of the utopia. Kaelen stepped out, his dark coat billowing in the artificial wind. A squad of Praetorian sentinels materialized at the far end of the platform, their armor gleaming with pearlescent white shifting alloys. They raised their rifles, weapons that fired concentrated beams of hard light. Halt! The lead sentinel commanded, his voice amplified. You're in violation of the sanctity. Identify. Kaelen didn't stop, he didn't run. He walked with the terrifying casualness of a man who has already seen the outcome of the event. He raised his left hand, fingers splayed. I am the time you borrowed, Kaelen said, his voice rusty from disuse, scraping against the air. The sentinel fired. The beam of light streaked toward Kaelen's chest, moving at the speed of light, yet to Kaelen, trained in the null state to perceive the gaps between moments, it was sluggish. He twisted his wrist. The chronos siphon flared with a violet singularity. The beam hit an invisible wall of distorted temporal causality 3 feet from his chest and stopped. It hung there, a frozen lance of pure energy, vibrating violently. The sentinels gasped, their discipline shattering. Kaelen closed his fist. The captured energy reversed, aging rapidly, its waveform decaying until it was nothing but harmless heat radiation that dissipated into the jasmine-scented wind. I turn, Kaelen whispered. He thrust his palm forward. He didn't fire a laser. He projected a field of accelerated entropy. The lead sentinel screamed as his armor began to rust in seconds. The pearlescent alloy turned brown, then flaky, then dust. The man inside aged 60 years in a heartbeat, his muscles withering, his bones becoming brittle, his skin sagging and spotting until he collapsed. A heap of dust and ancient biological matter inside a pile of corroded scrap. The other guards scrambled back in horror, their immortality treatments useless against a weapon that manipulated the flow of time itself. Kaelen walked past the pile of dust, stepping through the blast doors that melted away before him, reverting to their pre-forged state of molten ore before cooling into slag on the floor. He moved through the grand avenues of the city. Civilians, beautiful and ageless, froze in terror as he passed. He ignored them. They were cattle, fed on the lies Vexia had processed from his genius. He saw the citadel rising in the distance, a spire of diamond and light that pierced the artificial sky. That was where she would be. She had always loved the view from the top. As he ascended the gravity lifts, Kaelen let his mind drift back to the before. He and Vexia in the lab, working on the zero-point extraction. She was the ambition. He was the intellect. They were perfect. He had loved her with a density that rivaled the star they now circled. And she had loved him, he realized now, only as a resource. When the council demanded a sacrifice to stabilize the initial matrix, she hadn't volunteered herself. She had volunteered him. She had turned him into the battery that powered their golden age, locking him in a box where he couldn't die, only suffer, anchoring the reality they enjoyed. But she had made a miscalculation. She assumed the null state was empty. She didn't know that in the silence, one can learn to speak to the fabric of the universe. Kaelen reached the apex of the spire. The doors to the throne room were made of organic nano-glass, swirling with patterns of galaxies. He didn't open them. He simply walked through them, phasing his molecular structure for a microsecond to align with the glass's atomic gaps. Inside, the room was vast, dominated by a panoramic view of the white dwarf star outside. And there, sitting on a throne of suspended light, was Vexia. She hadn't aged. If anything, she looked younger, more radiant, her skin glowing with a faint bioluminescence. She was no longer entirely human. She had integrated with the core of the station. She didn't look surprised. She looked tired. I wondered when the battery would run dry, Vexia said, her voice echoing not from her mouth, but from the walls, surround sound divinity. She stood up, her robes of flowing data silk shimmering. You look terrible, Kaelen. The null state lacks amenities. It gave me time to think, Kaelen replied, stopping 10 paces from her. The room hummed with power. He could feel the connection she had to the station. She was the brain of the Ouroboros. To kill her would be to crash the station, killing billions. She knew this. She counted on his morality. You can't hurt me, Kaelen, she said, descending the steps of light. I am the ring. I am the atmosphere these people breathe. You strike me. You strike history. You were always too soft for the hard choices. That's why I had to do what I did. I saved humanity. You were just the cost. Kaelen laughed, a dry, cracking sound. You think I came here to kill you? You think I came here to destroy your toy? He shook his head slowly. Death is a release, Vexia. Death is an end. I haven't had an end in 5 centuries. Why should you? He activated both gauntlets. The room darkened. The white dwarf star outside seemed to dim as Kaelen drew power from it, siphoning the stellar energy into his hands. Vexia's eyes widened, the first crack in her composure. What are you doing? The stabilization matrix. If you disrupt it. I'm not disrupting it, Kaelen said, his eyes glowing with violet Cherenkov radiation. I'm isolating it. He slammed his hands together. A shockwave of temporal distortion rippled out, passing through Vexia. She tried to scream, to command the station's defenses, but her command codes were overridden by the static of the null state. Kaelen wasn't killing her. He was carving out a slice of spacetime around her. He was building a cage. You wanted to be the eternal ruler? Kaelen roared, the sound tearing at the reality of the room. Then rule. The air around Vexia shimmered and hardened into a crystal-like opacity. She froze mid-scream, her hand outstretched. To the outside observer, she looked like a statue caught in a moment of terror. But Kaelen knew the truth. Inside that field, inside that Chronos bubble, time was slowing down asymptotically. 1 second outside was 1,000 years inside. She would remain there, conscious, aware, trapped in the single second of her downfall, stretching it out for an eternity. She would have billions of years to contemplate the cost of her ambition, all within the blink of an eye for the rest of the universe. Kaelen lowered his hands. The hum of the gauntlets died down. The room was silent. Vexia stood frozen in her amber prison of distorted time. The station continued to hum. The people below continued to live, unaware that their goddess had been deposed, replaced by a monument to hubris. Kaelen walked to the window and looked out at the dying star. He was tired. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, echoing vastness. He had his revenge, but it hadn't given him back his life. He turned away from the throne, away from the frozen woman, and walked toward the exit. He would leave the Ouroboros. He would wander the stars. He had an eternity to figure out who Kaelen was. Now that he was no longer a battery or an avenger, he was simply free. And for the first time in 500 years, he took a breath, and it felt like his own.